Hello, my name is Brittany Johnson. I'm from the Douglas County Historical Society, and I'm here today to talk to you about another piece of Douglas County's history with some interesting stories and historical information from Broadway Street in Alexandria, Minnesota. Broadway is a street in Alexandria. Historically, it was the town's main street with a capital M, capital S. It was called Main Street. It was also called G Street for a bit, but we will talk about that in a few minutes. It was the road that laid at the heart of what was historically called Alexandria's business district or business blocks, or the Central Business District. It is part of the present-day Minnesota State Highway 29 corridor. Today, traffic counts indicate about 16,300 annual average for daily traffic in that corridor, and an annual average of 1,050 heavy commercial vehicles. That is according to a recent report that was actually in the Echo Press in February 2022. So Broadway has its origins going back to the late 1860s. We had the stage line and the military road that ran east-west through Douglas County, connecting St. Cloud to Fort Abercrombie. The road that would become Broadway once everything got a little bit more populated ran and met perpendicular to the stage line. Along that early road is where a lot of Alexandria's earliest businesses, it just kind of made sense for them to arrange themselves. You had your blacksmiths, your stables, your hotels, your first early dwellings, cabins basically, your first general store. All of that sort of started popping up along this road that met up and butted up to the stage line. As time went on and Alexandria's industry and economy developed more, this is also where the banks and the professionals like doctors also started to have their offices. Early on, of course, the sidewalks on the sides of the street were just boards, planks of wood that gave people something a little bit out of the mud to walk on. We can get a general sense of what they would have looked like because in 1883, in the Douglas County News, the city passed Ordinance number 24 to expand the sidewalks, saying that the width needed to be of 4 feet and constructed of the following materials: 2-inch pine or oak planks not exceeding 8 inches in width be constructed in the manner following, that the plank be laid crosswise and to rest on at least 2 stringers or supports, said stringers to be at least 2 by 4 inches in diameter, the inside of said walk to be 18 inches from the east line of the street. Again, we can just get a little quick glimpse at what that would have looked like. But not everybody was super. Those early wooden sidewalks, of course, were later replaced with cement sidewalks. Planning for that was underway in April 1898. This might be a little bit of a hyperbolic view of the sidewalks, but the editor of the Alexandria Post-News said that, moreover, these old oak walks are an abomination to those who walk on them. They are uneven, the nails constantly work up and tear shoes and dresses, and they rot and become unhealthful and are in every way undesirable. Of course, during this time, discussion was underway for the building of cement sidewalks, which would be constructed by a local cement worker and contractor construction worker, James Ayton. They really pushed how awesome these cement sidewalks were going to be. In this same news article, the editor also gives pretty substantial reasons for why the city and businesses should invest in having cement sidewalks. In this same news article, the editor gives several substantial reasons for why they should put in cement sidewalks along Main Street, what's going to become Broadway. First is good looks, he writes in his own words. Just as an advertisement, it would be worth the cost in the impression on strangers. Cleanliness is another reason. Also, if not ordered in within a certain limit of time, they will struggle in without uniformity in appearance. And so by August of that same year, 1898, the council did vote to have the cement sidewalks installed on Broadway. And again, the editor of the Alexandria Post-News was very excited about this, and again, a little bit hyperbolic when he was commenting upon the state of the sidewalks, when he said, "Also, practically all the wooden walks in the village should soon be rebuilt, and this ordinance will then ensure that Alexandria, instead of having the worst, most unsightly, and most dangerous sidewalks in the state, will have the best, handsomest, and safest." He was definitely lobbying very hard for sidewalks. As I mentioned earlier, Broadway was not the street's original name. It was called Main Street to a certain extent, and then it was called G Street in the blocks beyond that. By 1913, a street and avenue guide was published that explained the system by which the streets in Alexandria were named. They used the Philadelphia system, so blocks were each within the same kind of hundreds of numbers. So one block would be 500s, the next block would be 600s. The even numbers appear on the west side of the street and on the south sides of the avenues, odd numbers on the opposite to that. Starting in the west and then running to the east, the streets that ran north-south were labeled with letters. So there was an A street, a B street, C, D, E, and so on. So Main Street after 10th Avenue was called G Street, but a lot of maps, especially road maps, would sometimes extend that G Street up through the entire street. And then the avenues, the roads that were running east to west, starting at the north end closest to the lake, proceeding south, were labeled with numbers. So they actually started, basically today we start with 2nd Avenue, then we get into 3rd Avenue, 4th Avenue, 5th, and so on. In 1919, the City Council voted to lay paving down Main Street / G Street. In 1922, the city actually got some reimbursement from the state for the amount they spent on paving because the state of Minnesota was expanding the state highway trunk system. They were expanding roads, highways in general. We were getting into that age of the automobile, especially for tourists, and Alexandria was a very popular tourist destination. And also in the end of 1922, the City Park Board wanted to name the city's streets. Instead of having A Street, B Street, and so forth, they wanted to give the streets actual names. Their proposed list, published on November 16th, 1922 in the Alexandria Citizen News, was to take A into Ash Street, B into Bryant, C into Cedar, D into Douglas, E into Elm, F into Fremont. G Street was proposed to be Main Street or Broadway. Broadway, of course, is what has stuck around to today. Also worth noting that most of the street names they proposed during this late 1922 meeting are what we still use today. By 1923, early on, generally, those new names are in place. Instead of referring to Main Street, the newspaper is referring to the street as Broadway. So basically, just about 100 years exactly. This means that Broadway as a name is just about 100 years old. A lot of these changes were coming as more and more people were using automobiles, using vehicles to drive within Alexandria and to come to Alexandria for vacation or to come in from rural areas to do shopping, whatever their needs were. This was actually getting to be a problem with traffic. So in July 1926, the city voted to adopt new traffic regulations. Most interestingly, they decided to place an automatic stop and go signal. As they wrote in the Alexandria Citizen News on July 15th, 1926, the traffic in this city has been increasing constantly, and it is quite a problem for the policemen of this city to adequately regulate the traffic of vehicles without some provisions, which make traffic more or less self-regulatory. So the council at its meeting that Monday voted to put in this fancy new stop-and-go signal. The signal was an automatic stop-and-go signal manufactured by the Griswold Safety Signal Company of Minneapolis. It had a light and a bell, both to serve to notify traffic that a change is about to be made in the direction of traffic. This signal was also referred to as an American Bobby in the paper. Throughout July and August of that year, 1926, the installation and how it was going was definitely a hot piece of news. This first automatic stop-and-go signal was installed at the intersection of Broadway and Lincoln, which today is also just called 6th Avenue. As they wrote in the Park Region Echo, August 5th, 1926, the first day or two it has been necessary to keep a city policeman on the job near that corner to make motorists watch the signal and obey it. But by Saturday, when unusually heavy traffic is on the street, most drivers will be used to the new system, and a lot of the confusion which marks the arrival of Saturday crowds in the city will be done away with. Stepping away from the physical and mechanical history of the street for a moment, Broadway, as many other main streets and historic parts of cities across Minnesota and across the nation, also has suffered from a number of terrible fires which have destroyed businesses, homes, personal property, on occasion taken people's lives. It would be difficult to name every single fire that has happened along Broadway and still keep this episode kind of short, so I just want to highlight a couple of interesting pieces. Prohibition and temperance and liquor laws were what someone might call a flashpoint issue in Douglas County, to the extent that in 1901 there was a firebug, as the paper referred to it, starting saloons on fire, or trying to, up and down Main Street. In the Alexandria Post-News of August 22nd, 1901, there is an article simply headlined, "Tried It Again." Monday night, firebugs again tried to burn down Mr. Clemens Schneiderhan's saloon. They had filled in an old kettle with excelsior, chips, and kerosene oil and placed it against the building in the rear beside a large wood pile. Fortunately, Mr. Jerry Callahan again saved it. It was he who first discovered the fire that burned the Aberley building in which Schneiderhan was located, and this was at about the same hour at night. He had just left his saloon, having closed up business for the day, and was about to mount his wheel when he saw the blaze. He ran into the building, and Sheriff Lundgren reached there at about the same time. An alarm called out the fire department, but it was not needed. The building, which is a good large frame owned by Mr. John Sunblad, was only scorched. It was, of course, the work of firebugs. Someone aims in this way to close the saloons. The corner building and the Aberley have gone up in smoke, and it would have been the third if Callahan had not been too quick. Why they have twice picked Mr. Schneiderhan, who is a law-abiding, kindly man, apparently without an enemy in the world, is a mystery. Also, had he been burned out, Mr. Johnson next door would have lost his store, home, and all he has in the world. Saloons may be evils, most of us think they are, but they are a blessing compared to the firebug. This was an interesting article to me just because the editor of the Post at this time did slide in that, hey, most of us think saloons are evil, but also please don't burn buildings down because that puts everybody at risk. Another major fire that redefined how Broadway looked came in 1913, end of February. The Rader-Gunderson fire took down the previous Rader-Gunderson building. It was rebuilt and today is the home of the Magpie store. You'll be able to see it on Broadway. It was a $100,000 fire. The insurance carried for the building was about $40,000, so this did represent a significant loss. It took down a brick building that housed several sort of prominent businesses in Alexandria. And unfortunately, fires like this are not simply a thing of the past. In February 2020, a significant section of Alexandria's historic Broadway buildings were burned down in another fire. The cause of that fire has not yet been officially determined, but it did take down several of Alexandria's oldest business buildings that were on Broadway Street. But speaking of businesses, this is a good opportunity for me to highlight just a couple quick businesses of significant note on Broadway. One of Douglas County's earliest resident Black families actually had their barbershop business in various locations on Broadway starting in 1887. Austin Hobson opened his barbershop. He was joined a little while later by his son Fred. If you read old papers from Alexandria, you will see the Hobson men listed in advertisements as tonsorial artists, which is another kind of fancy fun name for barber that we don't always see today. And Mr. Austin Hobson also participated very actively in the development of Broadway. Per the Alexandria Post-News, in October 1888, Austin Hobson had heard and appreciated the case and would be erecting a street lamp in front of his shop after he moved into his new location at the old bakery stand. One more business I want to highlight here on Broadway, especially in this year, 2022, is Cowing Robarts. This is their 150th year in business at their original location. They've been at their original location the whole 150 years. Now granted, in 1872, when the business was started, it was a wood-framed structure. If you visit them today, you will notice it is a lovely old historic brick building. But it is at the same site, the same lot, where the original building was located. Originally, the Cowing Robards store was something of like your general store, your hardware store. They sold farming implements, they sold dry goods, they sold tools, the stuff you kind of needed in those early days of establishing your farm, establishing your home. As time went on and tourism became a more important industry, they sort of shifted to selling a lot of fishing gear, selling a lot of tackle, hunting supplies, things that guests and sportsmen to the area were going to need. And when that business began to shift and everybody became more accustomed to carrying their gear with them, usually because they were taking automobiles and so could carry more of their own gear, more supplies, clothing, etc., Cowing Robards again shifted to more what you see today. They do a lot of custom printing, apparel, trophies, kind of hardware, but of a different kind. And again, if I am not mistaken, because Cowing Robards is in this 150th year of business, is at their original site, I think they are the oldest business in that class doing so in Minnesota. If not the oldest business, they're definitely up there. They're definitely one of the oldest businesses doing so. Definitely one of a select few. I know a lot of people are probably going to be surprised we have this episode about the history of Broadway and we didn't talk about the big Ole statue, the 30-foot tall Viking, but we are going to cover that actually in an entirely separate episode because now that is a story and a half that needs its whole own episode. So I hope you will join us for that one as well as for the stories from Lake Darling if you have not heard that already. Thank you so much for listening to this one. I hope you're able to listen to it before, taking a walk down Broadway or shopping or driving through, just to kind of, I think, understand a little touch of the history and character behind that street. I am Brittany Johnson from the Douglas County Historical Society, and thanks for listening. Goodbye.